Texas high school football season is now underway. This is the first day of Texas high school football practice, but small school Texas high school football got the big spotlight on ESPN recently with a documentary, Six-Man, highlighting six-man football across the state. We're very pleased to be joined by the producer of that documentary. It's Scott Harves. Scott, appreciate your time. I want to ask you first and foremost about the inspiration behind this, because we here in Texas know about six-man football, but how did you catch wind of this, and what made you want to pursue this story?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all, and I will say I stumbled upon six-man football years ago, just doing some research for stories on the internet, and so caught on to sixmanfootball.com and just read about it, and just never really had a way to pitch it in a way that we could produce a story or a longer show like that. And sure enough, last year, it was probably early August, when the story about Olivia Perez and the Herald football team crossed a wire, and I read it, and the first thing that came to mind was, well, this is a very unique story, obviously, but is there a way I could sort of take that story and look at six-man football and find a way to package a bigger story, introducing the sport, but perhaps exploring some other towns. So I knew I always was interested in finding a way to do a story about six-man football. I just sort of, you get in between projects, and sometimes every fall some new football project comes up. So it's all a matter of timing. So 2016, it just so happened I had come off a bigger project in the summer, and I had the time to research it for a few days, and just discovering how many stories there were out there, within the landscape of six-man football. So it was just sort of my goal from once I found out about the Herald story, it was my goal to perhaps find 4, 5, 6 other towns that may have had interesting stories to try to package into a larger show to sell to my bosses. And once I started finding the stories, it really wasn't a hard sell at all.
Can you give us a sense of how long this project has taken? You mentioned that the Herald story came across your radar in August. Of course, the story of a girl joining the team because they simply did not have enough players. Can you give us a sense of how long this project has been going on?
Well, we started researching it in August, and so it was sort of. The way I, decided to streamline it was, okay, here's Herald, one of the smallest teams and schools in the whole landscape of six-man. But I thought, well, if I can find some other towns that are all competing for one goal, and that's that Division II. Herald was in Division II, so I decided to sort of narrow my search to Division II. Some people ask me, well, why only Division II? Why not D1? And I just thought, well, if I have a bunch of teams, playing for the same championship at the end of the year, I just thought that might help our storytelling in a way. And so, we went down to Herald at the end of August. But before I went down, I basically had an itinerary in place. I found some other storylines within some of these other teams we went to, and just had an itinerary in place that we would go try and spend 2.5 or 3 days in each of these towns, film, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in each of these towns. And that's how we went. We were in Herald for a September 2nd game. Then we took a weekend off, and then we were in Mount Calm the 16th. We were in Balmaray for the 23rd, Richland Springs September 30th, and then we took a few weeks off and came back to Calvert, and then we were able to come back for quarterfinals, semifinals, and ultimately the D2 title game in Dallas. Mm-hmm. So. We spent the whole fall sort of going back and forth, so we were there 8 times. I actually drove, I'm based in Minnesota. I drove myself down to Chester, Nebraska to just do some filming of my own in the town where six-man was invented to get a few shots there. But, and then, throughout 2017, I had, we had plans to air the documentary in February as a half-hour show, but I just was able to sort of convinced my bosses after we got lucky, and 2 of the 5 teams we covered, Balmaray and Richland Springs, they met for that title game. I just told them I thought we had more than a half hour, and so they afforded us the opportunity to go for the full hour, and they decided let's hold it till August when maybe we can get a little, bit more of a football audience ready for it. And so I spent a lot of the year working on it on and off. I had some other small stories and features I had to work on and some other things. But, for the most part, I was pretty locked into this, for the last couple months at least.
We're talking with Scott Harves, producer at ESPN of the new documentary Six Man, airing on ESPN News. The next airing is going to be at 3:30 p.m. on Monday as we're recording this on ESPN News. And then I know that it's going to be bouncing around over the next week, so just kind of tune into your local listings. I want to ask you, because you mentioned you're a Minnesotan.
Yes.
For us, I think that we kind of take for granted how much we just are locked into Texas high school football. We understand it. What was the learning curve like for you to come down and realize? Because you said so confidently about Division I and Division II. There's a lot of folks out of state that's just completely lost on them. What was the learning curve like for you in getting to know six-man football?
I guess I had done enough research ahead of time to understand the rules, and I had reached out to, I talked to multiple coaches. I talked to guys like Granger Huntress, who runs sixmanfootball.com, Lehman Saunders, Six Mania, Cowboy Park. So I talked to these guys on the phone. I ended up interviewing them, but I just was able to sit and chat with them for each maybe 45 minutes or an hour, and they were just super helpful, just as far as sort of helping me understand, the landscape of it all. And, and I also got a little background on some of the past history of media coverage within Six Man and some of, perhaps the do's and don'ts and some of the things people had thought were, the misconceptions of the sport. And, I tried to take all that into account. And again, being from Minnesota, I almost look at, in Minnesota, high school hockey is the thing, a lot of kids grow up and loving. So I understand sort of the passion for a particular high school sport. Certainly not on the level of Texas high school football, because I think, for me, it wasn't hard understanding six-man football. For me, it was hard understanding exactly how long I was going to be in a car driving to some of these towns, because Texas is an enormous state, and you see it on a map and you understand it, but until you're doing 3-hour drives from the nearest airport, or until you're driving, to Balmorhea and to a playoff game 4.5 hours away, you don't really understand it until you make those drives. And that's when you really appreciate just kind of, some of these guys telling me, yeah, we're driving 3 hours for a district game, and you hear it, but then I think you really come to appreciate it once you get in that car and you make those drives and just experience it yourself. So that was, and I love driving places I've never been, and so certainly these were 5 towns I had never been, and but it's you finish a Friday night football game. Say you get out of a town at 10 or 11, you're driving 3 hours back to the Austin airport, and then you're flying back out at 6 in the morning. So there were there were some driving hours put in.
Well, and you mentioned
it was all worth it.
Yeah, and you mentioned like you went out to Balmorhea, and like Max and I are sitting here, we're like, yeah, we know where that is, and it's not near anything. It's kind of by its own, by design, but I also know that that's a really interesting story, and Coach Vance Jones is such a great guy, a favorite of ours. You went to Richland Springs, of course, the powerhouse, Mount Calm, Herald. It seems like it was really important for you to kind of spread out the kinds of stories there were as well. I think it would have been it would have been almost not easy, but it would have been easier to just focus on here's Richland Springs, the best team in six-man football, and instead it seemed like it was really important for you to find different kinds of vignettes to tell kind of a wide tapestry of the story.
And I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. The obviously Richland Springs, for their success, they were an obvious choice, but really the success of the other teams really had nothing to do with why we went there. It was just looking for kind of a diverse group of stories. And Texas as a whole, sure, there are a lot of those. In West and Central Texas, there's a lot of those similar ranching type towns, but that's what I think I was able to discover in Six Man, is that there was a diverse group of stories and places to go, and it wasn't just all sort of out in those the oil and ranching towns. So that that made it fun, and I thought that made it it's important to understand that Texas, it's a diverse place, and you can, there's just so many different things to see. And so, ultimately we decided, that's kind of how we wanted to go about doing the story. And, I will say, though, this, in the landscape of Division II six-man football, the things that these towns all do have in common, you can research the stats on, free and reduced lunch. These kids, where there are a lot of families having a hard time making a living. Kids don't pick what homes they're born into. They can't, you don't pick the cards you're dealt, but you can choose how to play them. That's an old saying I've heard. And I think that's what a lot of these coaches preach to these kids is that, life may be hard in your family or in these towns, but, we're playing football and we're going to help you get an education and, try and, make you successful later in your life. And that was just a very common theme throughout all the coaches, that I talked to, and you could just see it in them working with those kids.
He is Scott Harves, the producer of Six Man, the documentary that's airing today, 3:30 p.m. Central on ESPN News. It's also going to be popping up on the ESPN family of networks over the next week, and hopefully on demand here soon. It's a tremendous piece, and I don't want to speak for the entire state of Texas, but I'll say that you're welcome here anytime you want to wander down south. It was really remarkable, and we really do appreciate your time chatting with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me on.